Hello, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django, and my name's Matt Lehman, and we work on Django apps on the stream. Tonight we're going to continue on the homeschooling app that I've been building for better part of a year, and the focus tonight is going to be on making URLs nicer. So my current URLs are using very long UUIDs, and I'm tired of them, and I think that I can change them to something better, and we're going to switch to using hash IDs, which will produce much shorter and still achieve the same effect that UUIDs were roughly producing for the site. So that's what we're going to do. Hopefully you'll stick around and check it out. Before I get started though, I want to let you know about ways you can keep in touch with me. I am on Twitter as MBLehman. I'm also on Patreon as MBLehman. So patreon.com/MBLehman if you want to support me, if you like what you see here and you want to be able to financially contribute. Because I use that money to help pay for podcasts and do other things for the community, and I'm really grateful for all the support there. To that end, I want to thank my patrons that I do have of Rupert, Andrew, Patrick, Eric, Philip, and Miguel for helping me out. It's really appreciated. Okay, let's get to it. We've got a project, and I'm kind of midstream on this project. I was actually starting this a little bit earlier today. I want to make sure I have a good handle on if this is even going to work out, and I think it is. And so what I'm doing is I'm switching the URLs from my site to use this hash ID library. And I realized I just pulled up the wrong spot, different window. Let's try that again. Hash ID, blah, blah, blah. No. Okay. So this is a field that basically does a translation from going from something like a primary key, like if your primary key is 1 on your model, and translates it to something that you've seen on probably many sites where it's some sort of ASCII or hexadecimal looking kind of thing where it might, 6 or 7 characters, and it produces some kind of weird, not weird, but just a short and unique set of random characters. That comment's not gonna make sense to anybody coming in later, so I'm gonna say, put a chat comment in here. Random characters for hash IDs. So this is what this field does. It essentially is very transparent to your application. It kind of wraps around certain fields if you want them to, or you can have unique fields that are essentially at the database level are stored as either a regular integer field or a big integer field if you have a lot of these data elements. But Django does the translation, and hash is actually a misnomer. That's one of the things I discovered. It's not really a hash because let's see if I can find this project website quickly here. Hash IDs. There it is, hashids.org. So this is kind of where it comes from. It's actually a lot of projects or a lot of languages support this feature. It's pretty small, but you can see that it does some conversion and takes a number and produces something that is not a number. And this gives the benefit of obscuring what your numbers are in your system, so that people can't just see the IDs and that belong to your database models. And makes that harder to figure out. There are security things in here that they do warn about their ways to like brute force this, because what I learned is that this is actually not a one-way hash. These are designed to be hashable in both directions, and that's how the scheme works out. So by producing a URL that looks like a hash, there is code on the other side that can take these short strings and convert them back into the number when doing a lookup in the actual database table. And it just produces URLs that are a little bit nicer than what I had. So I'll show you what I mean. We can compare and contrast the URLs that I have currently in the system and what a scheme that looks like hash IDs has. And that's my plan, is to go through this. And I'll show you along the way how I'm planning to do this with this particular library. So I'm going to bring up the site at port 5000, and we're going to go to the app. And we're just going to click into, just about anywhere should show off what I mean. So, oops, let's go back, click too many. So you can see up in here my URL bar. If I hover over it, I've actually got 2 hashes here, because one is for a UUID for a student, and one is a UUID for a course. And both pieces of data are needed to make this page to come together. But the effect of that, as I mouse over it, so you can see the whole thing, is that it is a brutally ugly and brutally long URL. And this only gets worse when some of these pages have a next parameter on them. So if I click onto here, for example, come to this edit page and come to the same URL, I mean, hopefully you can see that hover text. You don't need to make out all the details of it because it might not be coming through super clearly, but there is the hash ID, there's the UUID for the actual URL, and then there's a query string parameter that has a next URL that also has UUIDs in it, and it just gets really, really gnarly. So this is what it looks like now. I was working earlier on this, as I said, and have one of these done. Whoops, I'm mid-progress on one, so there's a 404 here that wasn't happening before. So I guess I can't show you the example yet because the page that I can navigate to that has it is only accessible through this page that I want to get to. Suffice to say that the URLs that in this scheme are a lot nicer, and I'm going to continue to update my URLs to all be in this style, which I think will just make for a nicer experience on the site. I mean, URLs are not a big part of the user experience for a site, I think, but when you get really gnarly stuff, it starts to become noticeable, and I really don't want that. Okay, so let's go back into this work. And like I said, I'm kind of midway through this, and so we're just going to jump in right to where I was. I was in the process of converting the course detail page over to use this new scheme. And the way this works is there's this hash ID auto field. So on a typical Django model, if you don't declare a primary key, Django will give you one automatically, and it has the name ID. So what I'm doing with this line of code is actually taking the existing ID and wrapping the field definition. Instead of just being a plain auto field, it's now going to be a hash ID auto field. At the database level, this is the same. The auto field by default uses an integer field kind of type, or stores as an int. So that's what's going to be there. So like there is a database migration that will come out of this Django change, but it won't actually be doing database operations on my Postgres database. It'll be totally transparent there. So it's just kind of Django's bookkeeping of what is the field type. And so anytime this field is accessed in the system, it will actually, instead of being a number like it was previously with the auto field, it will be it'll accept either these hashes, these kind of hash-looking things, and can use those to query. The field is smart enough to be able to take a string and try and convert that to a number, and it's pretty powerful. I asked about this on Twitter and trying to get some recommendations about it, and there's one recommendation that I actually forgot to apply here that I want to come back and take. One response that I got was from Carlton Gibson, who is one of the Django fellows, and he said that he uses hash ID field, but what he likes to do is there's an ability on the actual field to add a specific salt to a field. So that the way that the scheme works is it takes some random string that you have in your system, and it passes the number through kind of a function that combines this piece of data, this salt, which is again a random string, and it makes a new value out of those things. And that's how it gets a consistent thing, a repeatable value out the other side. So that the number and the salt, they merge together in this hash ID function, and they come out the other side on this short-looking hash thing. So the salt is really important, and it's one of these things that you want to keep secret. It does note in the documentation that you don't want this to be like your Django secret key, because that is something that can be it can be brute forced, and people could figure out your secret key, because this is not meant to be a secure hashing algorithm. It's meant for display purposes. So I've got this hash ID field salt variable defined in my settings, and what Carlton pointed out is that if you get down to the field itself, by default, it will try and just use the salt field from the global settings, but you can set your own. And so I was looking around at some various code, about how this could work. And there's a way that you can essentially quickly customize this so that you can change the salt. So why would you want to do that? The reason to do that is that this hashing algorithm is the same. So if I have the same salt value for all of my models, then any model that I make this on, if it's a course number 1 and a task number 1, the hash ID that would come out of that would look the same. So if we change the salt a little bit, it can tweak the algorithm and the inputs going in and generate an entirely new and unique looking hash value. So I think that's what I want to do. I want to come back into this hash auto field and set the salt to something slightly different. And I was working on another one earlier, so we're going to get both of them before we get too far down this road. So we've got, we'll come in here and we need to find the instances of the hash ID auto field. And there are 2. And we're also going to need, in this file, we're going to need the settings. So I want to say from Django conf import settings. And the salt that I want to provide, I'm going to just use it kind of doesn't matter too much what it needs to be. It just needs to be something different. So I'm actually going to continue to use most of the salt from the global setting, but just prefix it with another set of characters. In this case, I'm probably going to use the name of the model itself. And those 2 things together should produce something new. So we'll say salt is equal to course plus settings dot hash ID field salt. So now we should have something unique. And should I make that an F string? I don't know, maybe. How is that going to look? I make it an F string and say settings hash ID field salt. Maybe that's slightly better than using the plus. Again, this is not super important part of this part, but I want to get this right from the start, because here's the downside. So the downside of this scheme is that if I ever had to change this hash ID field salt, all of these hashes for every URL on my site, as soon as I changed it, would be something totally different. So it can, if you had to change something, it could impact like your ability to have links to that people might have permanent links to things. So I definitely don't want to change it, which is why I want to get this right now before I push it out there. So we're going to go to the other spot and we're going to do the same thing. And all I'm doing is going to replace this and just call this, I'll just call it course resource. And so now we have, both of these have a unique salt that is unique to this model, so that it should give them unique IDs for different hashes. All right. So this is the basic mechanics of this. And a lot of what we're going to be doing in this stream is going through here and adding hash ID auto fields to different models in the system, and then going into the respective views that are using UUIDs and replacing them with IDs. If you have any questions about this, and just in general, you're free to ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development as we're going along, because a lot of the guts of this is going to be just a very thorough process of making sure that these are all done. Thankfully, I can lean on the fact that I have 100% unit test code coverage. So if I do something wrong, with any luck, my unit test will catch it. It's not a guarantee, but it certainly helps a lot. So I was working on the course detail view before I started this process. And so we need to go to each one of these instances where course detail appears in my project and change this code to reference IDs. So I'm going to jump to the test file, because that's a good place to start, and make sure I'm on the right. That's the course create. So where is course detail? There it is. All right, so let's try it out. See how much is broken, or if I can't remember if I already fixed this or not. I think I ran out of time. Nope, looks like I already fixed this. So the detail view itself is ready to go, which means I've fixed the URL routing. We can see that. We can go to the courses URLs and check out that file. And so the big change that I'm going to be changing for a lot of these is we're switching from a UUID converter, and I'm switching to the name of the argument is going from UUID to PK. The reason I'm using PK is this is what Django's class-based views use by default for lookups. And so if it can find a PK, it'll do the primary key. So I could have done ID, but if I do that, the class-based built-in class-based views will complain about that. So it actually reduces a line of code by using PK instead of ID. They're, for all intents and purposes, synonyms for most Django projects, but there is some nuance there that I'm not going to get into right now. The other thing is that I want to use the slug converter. And this is not technically the most accurate converter, because the slug converter, a slug in Django is anything that matches letters. Ooh. And does it do, there's actually, let's go check this out. I want to make sure this is right. Okay, let's go. I've got a local Django clone. And where are the converters defined? There they are. Okay, good. So here's the regular expression pattern that is used by the slug converter. And so a converter is something that has to match a certain way in a URL. And so we're matching on the character classes A through Z, lowercase and capital, and the numbers. But notice also that it can match on a dash and it can match on an underscore. So that means that even though I am using the slug converter here, it's actually a little bit more permissive than what are really the hash ID values are. Because Django hash ID uses the parameter is called the alphabet or something. Yeah, the field alphabet. So you can, this is the default field alphabet that it will use, and it will generate stuff from that. And you could constrain it. And so this alphabet, as you can see here, is letters and numbers, which is very close to slugs, but it's missing dashes and it's missing underscores, which means that the algorithm will never use those two characters. So you could put in a dash or an underscore and it'll get past the URL matching part, but it might fail on the actual lookup. I don't think that's going to be a problem for the vast majority of cases. I don't think any users are really going to be modifying these fields, or it's really unlikely. So I'm going to go with slug as a good enough approximation. So this is what we're doing. We're going to be changing these and then reworking any call site that actually uses UUID and change it to use the ID instead. And I've already corrected this set of tests here. You can see the example. It has to pass in a PK and we give it the ID. So that's the pattern we need to follow. And then the rest of this is a fairly mechanical process, sort of unavoidable, sorry, but we'll get going and get them all changed. All right. So let's do these one at a time. I think we don't need to have the test file up. I think we can just go straight to go into the different views. So here's just a reverse, and that's an ID. That's nothing to change. And now we want to change this to be, ooh, interesting. Already, like what is this UUID referring to? That's the course edit view. We haven't done that yet. All right, so maybe we need to change some of these things as we go along to get this accurate, because it is going to depend on a different UUID. So there's this weird like problem state where I could be in this mixed mode of getting some of these and not getting all of them, or not having the data that I want at the right time. And course edit is clearly one of these examples. All right. So let's go through and actually correct the course edit one first, the actual view, and then we can come back and do course detail. I'm going to need some notes for myself here because I'm going to lose track probably of what we've done and haven't done. So we'll come into this area and we'll just open up a little scratch pad. And so we want course detail. We might treat this like a stack of can we go through these? Like course detail is dependent on course edit before we can get back to that. So maybe we work from there. Okay, and course edit should be following this course detail. So this should be passing right now because we haven't changed it. So we're going to bring up the URLs file as well. This is going to be kind of tiny. I apologize for that. I just need a bunch of things open at once and the reality of what we need to do. So let's change this to slug and PK. That's the only change required for the edit view. And to do the proper lookup now, we don't actually need to specify slug and slug URL keyword arg. We could just leave it out and it will actually default to the PK lookup. So that will change there. And then we need to come down and make sure that any use of UUID is no longer in play because it's not going to be there. So where we have I'll get to your question in just a second, Whalebites. Let me get this edit view going, but I do see it there, and I think it's an interesting one. So where we have this course detail lookup, we actually want to switch this now to PK, and we're going to use the same PK that is coming from the edit view. Okay, so your question is about what do I recommend, what operating system? Frankly, use the one that you use. I don't know if, and that's kind of maybe not the best answer for that you want to hear anyway, but Python has really good support these days for Linux. It has really good support these days for Windows. It has good support for Mac. So what operating system are you most comfortable in? I think any of them is going to can be a very good fit for you, and especially if that's just where you're already acclimated to. There are differences between the platforms for Python, notably in shell usage. So, but maybe that doesn't mean anything to you right now. If you're familiar with the command prompt versus PowerShell versus Bash and those things, that might matter to you. I'm currently on a Mac here, so and a Mac is very similar to a Linux environment, at least when it comes to programming. That's not necessarily an endorsement of Mac over a Windows machine. I've used Windows for development in the past. This is a machine that I've had from a past employer, and that's what the company issued at the time. So I got used to Mac, and that's kind of where I stayed. You're welcome. Okay, so we've got the test, and now we've modified the URL, and I fully expect that this is going to fail. And it does, because it didn't match. We passed in UUID, and it doesn't have those things anymore. So we need to change this now. So instead of UUID, we want PK, and we want ID. This test should now pass. Okay, and we just come through here and sort of mechanically change these things. This is PK, ID, and interestingly, I did not assert on where this goes afterwards. That's okay. PK and ID. And I think all of those three tests should pass, which they do. So like I said, we're going to treat the notes area like a stack, so we can come down to the course edit. We'll look for courses edit, is the thing that we now need to correct, and look through the list of results here. So those are using PK and ID. Those are the tests. But the other place that we have to correct along this path is anytime the templates use it as well. We have to change those to be using ID, and also apparently the right keyword arguments. So gave it this one a keyword argument. That's curious. I don't often do that. Shivans, I think. I think it depends. Sometimes I'm very much into so there's different kinds of test-driven development is my real take on it. So you can do test-first development, which is what some people might classically mean by test-driven development. And sometimes I do that. Like if it's a feature that I'm uncertain of or whatever. Sometimes I do test last development where it's a feature that I really know how to do. I've done it a million times before, and the test at the end is really the insurance for the future that I've got this test covered and for regression, so that I don't run into problems again. And then there are times where I might be in mid, trying to do test last, but I come in across some more complicated situation and drop down and start writing a unit test. So my answer is I do a lot of tests. I write tests all the time. That's a given for me. But when I do that is sort of based on the kind of development I'm doing at that moment. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, we've got this next template. I'm going to switch that to PK. And, I do, when I write my tests, or write, a lot of these views go through the rendering process. So if I got any of these wrong, I don't explicitly test that, is this URL this value at this time? But if I got this wrong, the rendering process is going to raise an exception on something like a URL because it's not going to understand it. And so we can have some confidence that would be a good thing to catch here. Okay, so then we've got down into this one, and that's PK and ID. All right. So I think I've now handled all the course edit examples, courses edit. They're all PK versions if I'm looking through this short list, which means I think we can return to the detail list and start working through more of those. So this view has already been corrected. We're just now correcting how it's called in usage. And we have to, instead of using UUIDs, pass in regular IDs. Okay. So this is not the most glamorous chunk of work, and I apologize for that. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. We can kind of just casually chat while we're going through here. But this is work that is important for me. I think it's important in the sense that it'll be good to be done, and it will mean that as I get more users on the platform, they'll just get this nicer experience with not these crazy long URLs. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if that's still true. Maybe I forgot something there. I'm going to leave it for now. I'm not going to try and... The other danger is when you're doing a big change like this, you might see things along the way because I'm going to be touching a lot of code, and there's a temptation to say, "Oh, I'm here. Let me fix that." And I don't think it's a good pattern to get into, just because it's hard to keep track of all that stuff, everything that you've changed, and even with a good set of tests, you might just get carried away. All right. So what is this view now? Okay, this is course task create. So this is where can't just replace UUID with that. Now I think what that means now is we need to move into this course task create and fix this one. So let's go to our little stack here. We've got course task create is kind of the next one. We did the edit one, and we're gonna pop down into course task create. Okay, so course task create. Oh man, uses. Okay, all right, I see. Got some stuff going on here. This is gonna spider for a while, and this is why I don't want to bite off like extra stuff that I don't have to, because it just, at some point I'd like to find like a stable point where I've gotten a whole set of a group of cluster of views all taken care of, and be able to add that to the Git stage and have a good checkpoint, because I'm kind of out on a limb right now as I'm making edits. So we've got the course task create. It's right here. We want to change this one. So let's go find that test case. Course. I try and use consistent naming. So course task create. Here it is right here. It's still using the UUID version, so these tests should pass. Oh, but they don't. Oh, it's because the detail view is expecting those things to be a PK, and it's receiving a UUID right now. So here's a good example of like once we clean this up, it'll allow us to fix that place that was calling the detail, and we'll get to fix that. So we want to change this course task create to be slug PK, just like the others. And it looked like that was enough to trigger it to go down to one line for black formatting there. And it's more of the same. Actually, what's the name of this one? We want to, it's task create. So let's also bring up a search for courses task create, because we have to go filter and correct all those later. So but let's get the test working first. I'm going to change this to PK, change this to ID, PK, ID. I feel like I'm going to be saying that a lot tonight. PK ID. Maybe I shouldn't say it. How about that? Then I'm just going to be silent most of the stream. All right. And, you know, why am I doing all this? Like, why am I showing this on a stream? I think I'm showing it partly because I want to get it done, but partly to like highlight that sometimes software development is not about doing something wildly creative. Sometimes it's just about doing the work, getting down there and like rolling up your sleeves and just doing the work. And you know, maybe there are ways that this could be done faster, perhaps, like with little macros and things. But there are advantages to going through each of these instances. And it gives me the ability to like visually look at these things and inspect that I'm doing what I want to do, and getting little chunks of code done one at a time. All right, let's try running the test again and see what happens. Oh, I'm goofed up pretty good there. Oh, okay. This is where I'm going to get into, yeah, this is where it's starting to spider out. All right. So all of those failed because the way that the course task create view was working is that I added this course mix into this view. It's a chunk of code that I extracted out, and I'm using it on a bunch of views. So I'm going to enter into like a broken state with what I'm about to change. But again, I'm going to change it all at once and deploy it all at once, so it doesn't really matter. But the course mixin allows me to call self.course somewhere, and it's a cached property. And we can go find that course mixin, which is up here. And you can see what it's doing. It's adding a cache property to the view. And cache property works by doing what it sounds like. It's like a Python property, so you can do a direct attribute access, but it's also caching it. And the benefit of caching it here is that this is doing a database lookup. And by using cache property, that for that during that request, you can call this property over and over again, and you are only getting one database query. And in this case, it's actually two database queries. There's a query to get the grade levels and then a query to get the object itself. But the real problem is right here, I am passing in the course UUID, which is incorrect. It's actually a course ID. And we're getting it's going to be stored in a PK field, and we're going to have it be that like that, and we want it to look like this. So now returning to this, with any luck, that fixed all those tests, which were probably broken. I fixed some of them. Okay, a lot of them are still depending on the success case, and they've got other issues. So we can go back to the course task create, and now we need to go look for that usage of UUID, which is here. And is it anywhere else? Oh boy. Let's hope not. Nope, nowhere else. Good. So if we change this to PK, change that to PK, now we should, with any luck, have a working set. Oh, almost. Oh, it's probably the test itself is doing expecting certain path. Yeah, okay. So let's look for test post. And at some point it's looking to do the reverse, and we need to change this to be PK and ID. All right. Did we get it now? Cool. So that's the actual view. So it tells me that the view itself is working, but it doesn't mean that we've corrected the what am I trying to say? The templates. Sorry, blanking out on what I wanted to say there. So we don't need to modify the bulk create URL. That's not the right thing. But we need to change the daily to be ID. ID. Yep. And let's refresh the search because I think it's yeah, I think it was stale. Oh, interesting. Rats. Well, goodness. Okay. This is a good example of where this is going above and beyond what I anticipated. So there's something that is setting a get parameter of a welcome to be a course. And I did this for the onboarding experience. Oh man. Okay. Welcome. So looks like we've got some tests for that too. Okay, we'll keep going. So what we want to pass on, that was the school year thing. So it's trying to like show when you finish onboarding, you get handed off to the school year page, but there's a special get parameter that's there. And that get parameter will influence. Oh, this is one we want to go check, I think. All right, let's go add to list. Check on welcome of onboarding. So I want to modify this here to just be the ID. What I want to check later though is that ID, is Django going to turn that into numeric, or is it going to turn that into the hash ID? I think it'll do the hash ID. I'm hoping it will, because that's what the field is for. But I don't know. I don't have enough experience with this to know for certain. Let's go into the test, and actually let's try running the test here. It'll prove it, because this is the place where it's happening from. So this test should fail with a mismatch. All right. Okay, good. That confirms it. So one side is the UUID, and that's what I have wrote in the test. And the other side is the actual short hash ID. So if I change this to the ID, I think this test should pass now. Okay, cool. Is there anything else we need to check then? Welcome is set. Nope, that looks like it. Great. Let's go back to this task create stuff. And I noticed that, I don't know if this is a recent change from ripgrep, but the sort order seems to change if I search for the same thing, which I don't like. So I need to check on that. Okay, going through this list, we have task create. I'm seeing a lot of PK. There's also a task create bulk. That's something different. So I'm going to ignore those for the moment. And a task create bulk HX, which is HTMX stuff. I'm going to ignore that as well. We're in the templates. So there's the templates we need to review. We've got task create. That's the one that we just did that little tangent to go fix the welcome, which are done. This is task create. I'm going to change this to PK and ID. And we're going to change this from PK and ID. I'm not really consistent, it seems. Sometimes I use the arg version where you just pass in the list of arguments, and sometimes I actually use a keyword version when calling URL. I don't know if one's better than the other. Probably depends on who you ask, but clearly I'm not doing it the same way all the time here. PK, ID, and PK, ID. Apparently there are a lot of places where you can create a task. Okay, that's bulk. And that's... Well, look at that one. That is not even what I expected. Did I already change this one? I think that's a mistake on my part. That should be PK. Okay. So that's the end of task create. And let's just review it one last time real quick to go through. Give us a little bit more space for the moment. Gotta look at each line. Looks pretty good to me. What I don't know in this whole process is if I'm going to miss things. There's a good chance that I will. I do have error tracking stuff. Actually, I'm not going to show that right now, but I have a connection to Rollbar. And if anybody hits something on the site which I didn't catch, Rollbar will notify me, and if it raises an exception. So I think there's a reasonable story to handle all this, but yeah, that's what we're going to do. So I think that's done. We still, this is probably, I want to check on this as like a task to do later. And we want to move on to the next thing. Let's go back to the courses detail. I think we're kind of back up to the top of our stack. Or bottom. I always get it's the way you view a stack. Do you view it from the bottom and you add layers, or do you view it from the top and you go down? I think it depends on where you learned, probably, in your mental model of it. Okay, and whoops, I gave that even smaller. That's not what I meant to do. Okay, we're here at this point. What view is this? This is the bulk create. All right. Course task, bulk create. Is next. So again, we want to change it to slug. We'll continue to use PK to be consistent, even though it's not a class-based view. And we'll change this to from UUID to PK. Goodness. All right. Apparently there's a helper function here that we have to change too. So it's going to change any user. Wow. All right. We need to check all usage. No, we don't. We're gonna get to all these eventually. So everything that uses get course is everything that calls this is going to hit this line of code eventually. So we'll change this to PK for the moment, and then we're going to go. Well, let's keep going down. We'll see where else it's not doing it right. And so we want PK and PK, and that corrects this view. That's good. But now we need to go and there's this get course function that is currently taking a UUID, but we want to change it to PK. And here, let's change this to PK, PK. Okay, so now we're back in the bulk. This is where we should go to the test for this and make sure that this view is actually working correctly. And hopefully also you're getting a sense of how just insanely valuable the tests are, because I think this would just be a nightmare if I was trying to do this without test coverage. So we'll change this to PK and ID. And PK and ID. ID. Okay, this is the last test. Cool. Let's go back to the top of this test case and try to run these tests and see how it goes. They all pass. Great. So we've successfully converted that bulk method over. But now the problem is that if I was to run, like, let's run the whole file, probably be quite a lot of red. There's pockets of it at least. And the reason for that is that there's some of these mix-ins that we've added or that we've modified, or this get course helper function that we've modified, are being used by other things. And now those things are no longer operational. We'll get back to them. So that was the other thing we need to do as well is come into the task bulk create. And now that we're using PK, we need to switch over those any call to that. So we want courses task create bulk and review this list. So PK, 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 those are all good. And then there's the place where it is used. I don't know how this was already converted to use ID. Okay. Maybe I did that preemptively. So that seems like the only place that it's called. All right. And then this other one, this HX one, is just not done yet. So we're done with the bulk task create. I'll just leave that as like a comment for the moment. I'm in a markdown file, so I turned it into a header, but it's kind of like a comment. But I'm going to leave it there because there's going to be a HTMX version that we're going to have to get to in a moment. Let's go back to the details and return to this conversion of the detail, which is the whole thing that started this little tree of upgrades that we're doing here. So we've got PK in a bunch of spots. What is this spot? It's another one using UUID. It is the course task delete view. This is an interesting one because this has got two UUIDs in it. So we can do this like as a partial conversion or convert the whole thing. But I'm not ready to convert the whole thing yet because I haven't added the hash ID to the course task model yet. So we can only do the partial, and then we'll come back for a second pass to do the rest of it. So we'll do course. Oh man, how's that going to work? Because it wants to do a lookup. There's another helper function. Good grief. Okay, thankfully that one's not using any ID stuff. So course task delete. Let's look over here. The course task delete. Here you can see it. So it's saying we've got the UUID for, well, maybe the simplest thing to do is go ahead and add it to I'm going to need this UUID conversion for the task model eventually. So doing it all at once will make this process a little cleaner. Although it's starting to make my brain hurt. So let's go open up the course models. And we've got the ID field here. So the next thing we want to do is find the course task. And here's this model. We'll put in the field. And we're going to change resource to be task. So that's now primed to do this, to be able to use as a hash ID. We can close that model file for now. And next is what? We want to come into the course task delete view. And so this first one, the UUID is referring to the course. So that's slug. Well, this is where it's going to get interesting. I think I want to rename this to be course ID. Yeah. We'll see why in a second. And then I'll change this to be slug PK. So now we've got, we can come in here and we can say PK and change this to course ID. And we're going to delete these two. So the lookup for the task here is actually going based off of these two attributes, but we want to go off of the PK, which is why I kind of inverted. Now this was originally saying UUID here is the unprefixed thing, but I wanted to flip that around. So the focus is actually on the task. So we've got course task delete, and here we are here. So we want to change this to be what? Both of these things are still fine, but we want this to be PK ID, and, or I guess it's now, nope, that's not it. It's course ID is course ID, and this is PK ID, right? And thankfully not too many tests in this one. UUID, course ID. This has the nice benefit of shortening, taking a couple of U's off a lot of spots in the code. Probably not a huge deal, but I think it does tend to cause some of these things to trip over and go down to a single line for black, which is kind of nice. Probably not all the time though. I have a feeling this one might actually flip over the other way. Okay. Let's try running it, see if it works. And it works. And now we want to find any usage of it. Courses, task delete. And that's course ID. Those are all of those. And then we want to go into the template where that page is and change this to be ID and ID. So that's, I didn't even write that one down. Course task delete, that was the next kind of on the list. Let's move on to the next detail area, the next spot where it's going to ask for it. So we have, I guess, so you can see as like detail is kind of so rooted in everything. All of these things hang off of a course. And so it just becomes pretty central for a lot of things are going back to the course. So it just becomes this hub. Which means there's probably better ways. I should probably take some lessons here of the next time I want to do one of these, I might want to pick a different one. When I get into the schools app and others, I'm not going to probably have time to do all of them tonight, but that's just kind of notes for my own sanity. Okay, now we've got moving tasks. Okay. Course. Oh, but we don't have to correct that yet. We can leave that alone because it has the ID. Course detail, yeah. It's only spots that have ID coming, the UUID coming from somewhere else, like this one. Course resource create. Okay, so here we are. Slug, PK, and course resource create. We want to change UUID. Okay. So those will fail. Some of them will fail because it doesn't have the UUID. So when it goes to do one of these is like posting and then it's looking for the redirect location and that hasn't been fixed yet. Come in here and we're going to go to the success URL and change this to be PK and the same thing here, PK. Cool. Next, we want to make sure that we update the templates for that. So courses, resource, create. Here's one. That's PK, an ID, PK, an ID, and then the rest were in the test code. So that one's done. How many of these do we have? 30 lines. Whew. Hopefully these start getting easier. This one's easy, thankfully. The update view accesses the course. It has the course object. So we can just do ID. Same thing for here. ID. Although, is that, oops, messed up. It has to be PK. And that also has to be PK. Keyword argument has to match too. Okay. Thankfully, we've done a lot of these tests already. Not all of them, but a lot of them. This one is not done. Right. Stuff got out of order there for a minute, so I'm going to come back to it. ID. ID. Okay. ID. Almost there. At least as best I can tell. Okay, let's see how we're doing. I have a feeling there's going to be a bunch of stuff that's still broken, but probably getting closer to more green. All right, we've got the bulk HTMX version of this. Let's go fix that up. Oh man, gotta check that. Some of these are like JavaScript changes that we need to check too. Yeah, this is definitely going to take a lot of like review afterwards and kind of some quality checks to make sure that some of these things are still good. So let's see, check on HTMX stuff. So we want to change this to be slug and PK as well. And search for courses, task create bulk HX. There is a test case for this. PK ID. Those are the three, appear to be the three tests for this one. How are those going now? Nope. Well, where are you blowing up? Let's find out. Slug PK. Is this test passing? First one. All right, you're passing. Are you passing? No. Ah, we haven't corrected the function yet. Get course task. Here it is. Okay. PK. Here's another one of those, excuse me. Here's another one of those users that was using the get course function. And now it's going to be corrected to get PK. So that was probably the problem with these tests. So that might have been it. Cool. And there's probably another function or two that's using the mixin, which is causing those to break because those haven't been updated yet. But we're getting really down to the end for a lot of these. Not all of them, but a lot. Let's try running the file again, see what else is broken. No way, just a couple failures? That's hard to believe. Course copy select view. Okay. Course copy. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. I really need to check on that. I think I just broke stuff and didn't realize it. So what did we just worked on the bulk thing, right? So courses, task create, bulk HX. Yeah, I was gonna forget the template and be really confused when it wasn't working. That would have been a super annoying one to find too, because it's in JavaScript. Okay. So next, we've got this courses copy select page here. One of those is failing. It's doing 400. It's probably using the mixin. It's my guess. Copy select. Well, doesn't, nope. Something else is going on. There's actually no parameters there. That's very interesting. What's your deal? Copy select. Login required, copy, yada, yada, yada. Really? What's going on here? That test passed. Maybe there's a bad URL call. 404. What? Also 404. I bet it's something in the template that I overlooked. So let's go find that template. The template courses copy. And what examples of UUID can we find in here? There it is. Copy from is the parameter. And I'm sure, well, I'm not sure. What is copy from? Well, that seems right. Still using a UUID there. That shouldn't be broken. We might have to step through some code here. Gonna keep looking further. That's the only UUID in here. What in the world is going on? This is not a complicated template either. It's doing a 404. Oh, bugger. I think I see the problem. Okay, check this out. Copy is a valid slug. So where this says slug, that's no good. This view must be, in order for this to work, must be put above this URL. It also does mean that if some unfortunate soul were to have a number, a generated value that was equivalent to copy, it wouldn't work. No, but that's not the case. That's okay, because there's this thing that says it's a minimum length. It's minimum guaranteed to be 7. But that is definitely the problem here, is that copy is not specific enough, and this slug pattern matches it. Wonder what else is going to fall into that trap. Well, all the rest of these have other stuff after the slashes, so they should be okay. This is just the one that doesn't have anything else. So the reason that this is failing, so if you're kind of new to URL pattern matching, at least in Django, you may be coming from other places and have a different understanding of it. Django is going to go through each URL route, and as it goes through them, it will say, does it match? Does it match? Does it match? And as soon as it finds one that matches, it says, let's try that, and then let's get out. So slug, copy could be a slug. So if the order was still the other way it was, where copy is below, it will never hit the more specific copy pattern. So we have to put this copy URL pattern higher in the list, so it will be attempted first. So there's nothing wrong with the data, as far as I can tell. It was just the URL pattern order. Now it's fixed. Okay, let's see how we're doing. We've got, I think that might have been all the test failures in this file. Okay, I'm going to run the whole suite though, see if that is actually working. And if it is, I'll be pretty excited about that. Nope. This is why we run more tests. So the core has some stuff that's not working. Good to check. Oh, interesting. These are all with the daily view, I think. Fascinating. All right. Was it just these 4 tests? It seems like a lot more. Let's go to that file. So this is in the core. And this was a daily test. I don't know which one. I didn't pay enough attention. All 4 failures are in here though. And we can go Well, let's look at one of them, test to grade. I could probably inspect it from there, but we'll take this one step at a time. Okay. So we've got get task completions by student. I see. So now that okay, so here's the problem. Now that we have this hash ID field, I have this scenario where I'm trying to, this daily view was looking at more, how do I describe this? I was looking for more specific parts. Now, can I just show this? Or will it just break if I try and show it? Let's go to the server and see if we're gonna get it to bomb out. Whoops. Yeah, that's not cool. That should be something different. So there's already an example where we missed something. We missed some stuff. Okay, let's go to the daily view and see if it's broken or not. It's not. Good. So each of these checkboxes on here is given this. And this used to be in a certain format that my code understood, that was task-number. And that's what this core stuff is trying to process right now, but it can't. Because it's trying to do a parse on that part. And whoops. It's no longer an int. It looks like a string. So the parse doesn't work. But it's still a valid task ID. So we need to go into this method, get task completions by student, and change that. I'm not sure why I parsed it. Maybe no idea. Core views, get task completions by student. Here we are. Let's see if I can make sense of these IDs being integers. So I think I want to check on the daily view if it's wrong in this way and in a weird kind of way, and it requires JavaScript. One of the weaknesses of my site is that I'm not testing. I'm not really testing JavaScript really well, or at all. So where JavaScript comes into the equation, that becomes a manual test, and that was something that was a choice. And here's an example where that kind of comes back to haunt me a little bit. All right. So let me make sense of this and see if it's going to be a problem though. So if we get the task completions by student, how is that data used? We have tasks by student. Goes through the tasks. The tasks, this is that list. So that function builds a list. And each list is a category of either complete or incomplete for each student. And it's a list of IDs. And this is making it actual integers. I'm not sure why I did the integer part. That's what I'm getting confused on. So coming down to how it's used, we have the list of IDs and tasks, and that is passed to this mark completion method. And that structure is actually another dictionary that has the complete and the incomplete. So the process complete tasks is the last one more layer down. So I'm not convinced those have to actually be integers, especially with the field. So there's a really good chance I've tested this code because it's important and it's in Python. So I think I'm going to try to take out the integer and just see if it works the way I expect. So let's go to that helper where it's parsing the stuff apart. What was that? Get task completions. And it was parsing them here. We're going to not do that. Take out the end part. Let's see if that bites me. Let's try running this file again, see how it goes. Okay, neat. And let's run the whole suite. Well, we have a passing test suite. That's good. That's really instills a lot of confidence. Not completely, but it's a good start. So I think what I want to do now is, so I feel like we're done with the depth on those course views, but let's go do these manual checks to make sure that things are still working okay. And yeah, maybe that'll be a good wrapping point for the night. We've been going for an hour and a half. Essentially, once the stream is over, I'm gonna have to do the same thing for this courses app was probably the biggest one, but this is also true of other apps that I have. So it's true of the schools app, it's true of students. I don't think the users had any stuff yet, but it's definitely true of you students. It's in the UUIDs there, and it's true of the school year. It's not true of that app, and it's probably true of the core app. Maybe not. No, actually doesn't look like it's true of the core app. But yeah, cool. And there are, let's see. It doesn't matter for the accounts app either. So there's only a couple more apps to do this for after that, thankfully. But it's again, it's not like the most glamorous work, but the result will be is that it'll look really nice when it's all done. I'm still bothered though about that math page. Like if I go over to the week view, I guess I didn't need to go that way. Click on math, then click over here. Oh, now it's working. Okay, maybe it just had that page was being cached for some reason. So look at this now. Like before, it was this long UUID. You can see the UUIDs, but now we can click on Math 2, and it's this much shorter BVZGOZD, which is much nicer. And we haven't. I don't know if you can see how well you can see the URL bar at the bottom. You can see that we've corrected the we've corrected parts of the URL. It's definitely a bit shorter, but there are definitely aspects of it that are still using UUID. I think what I'm getting at with all of this is I'm trying to like, maybe I still want to use UUIDs internal to the application, but I definitely don't want to use them as part of the URLs themselves. Hash IDs seem like a good fit to replace all of that. So where we have the query parameters at the bottom there, you can see previous task as a UUID, and then there's a task hash thing that was also a UUID. Those things can go away. And so the gain will be, how long is a UUID field? I actually don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. Let's find out. Let's import UUID. And then we can do length on stir on UUID and just generate a random one. So 36 characters long. So 36 to 7. And when you're on some of these things that have 4 or 5 or 6 UUIDs, that's just a massive reduction in characters in the URL. Oops. So you get these much nicer, like I can look at this URL now, and not only can I read the page, but I can look at the URL and see, oh, I'm about to make a resource if I get a basic understanding. And I think that will help frame people of where they are and see that there actually is a logical structure to the way the URLs are in this app, and that it was just hard to see before because it was obscured by all of that extra characters. Okay, so what did I say I wanted to check upon? There were 3 things. So there was one where we go to, there's the onboarding experience. So if I go to the site and I go to start, this is the first thing that you see when you log in, and you walk through all this stuff and you get to this, and here you are now. Yeah, so I'm not actually hashing the UUID. So maybe you might have joined a little later. Sinisterize me, I think is your name there. But here's hash IDs as a site. And this is a technique that is used in a lot of different languages, but you can get the gist of it here. Like it's not really truly a hash. It's not a one-way thing. It's actually bidirectional. So it's really, a better name is like integer obfuscator or something like that. But that doesn't make for a good short name to consider. But it takes a number and converts it into something based on some kind of salt that you give it, which is just some random information to help generate a consistent value, so that you can essentially encode and decode this integer number into this format here. So I'm not actually messing with the UUIDs themselves at all. I'm actually adding this additional library that is called Django hash ID field, which is a blending of this hash ID site that I just showed you with Django's fields. So it's a field type that can be added, and it does this translation, this encode and decode kind of thing whenever you want to not be exposing integer types. All right, so looking back here, I can already see an example where I've messed up. There's a UUID sitting there on the welcome on that start template that didn't get corrected. So that's not cool. If we go to templates and core start course task and find welcome, I thought I corrected this, but I did not. So now that we've got that correct, we can refresh this page and we get a much, much nicer welcome thing that is going to actually populate this. And it's only used on this page. So it was used for 2 purposes. The welcome, the presence of the welcome shows this big banner thing. And then the value of it is then used for this one bullet point to actually create a task, which you can jumps you right there. So the idea is like, You just created a course, you're ready to add tasks. You don't want to have to go somewhere else. You want to jump straight to that thing. And then Sinisterize me, I'm looking back at your question. Maybe I actually didn't answer what you were trying to ask, and I apologize if I got that wrong. So I answered, like, I'm not actually hashing the UUID, but I don't think I answered the second part of making a slug out of it. It's true. I could also make all of these things into slugs. The challenge there is that then I would have to, like, deconflict. So either I put every user kind of under a namespace where their stuff couldn't, like, one user's math class can't conflict with another user's math class. But even then, if some parent wants to rename their course math year after year, then I'd have to still deconflict even within that particular account. So I think making a slug is not something that sort of appealed to me either, to try and, there are ways to do it where you can look for a slug and pick an obvious name, and then if that slug's already taken, make a unique thing by tacking something onto the end of it. But I basically said, nah, forget that. Like, it's not what I want to do. But that was a good question. I appreciate that one. All right, so I can now have confirmed that the welcome thing works. HTMX stuff. So there's some bulk uploading features on the site now. So we can go to a school year, and we'll come down to this course. We'll pick this writing and grammar course, which already has some tasks. Actually, to make a better example, let's just go in here and create a new course. Bulk demo. And they add. Actually, I also want to go back to that thing and say copy course, make sure that's still working. All right, that's still working. Cool. That was the one where I had to reorder the URLs. I want to check on it. So go forward, and so now we're on the bulk demo thing, and there's an ability to create stuff in bulk. And here's where I want to go. I want to check out this page. This is where bulk stuff. This was a common, highly desired feature request from my spouse and some of my other customers, where you can make a lot of tasks at once. So you just sort of tab through and second, and then when you're on the last one, it populates a few more. Okay, so I think the thing that I want to check, let's inspect one of these elements. There's probably hidden in here somewhere is a course field. There it is. There's the hidden course field, but the difference now, though, and this is what I need to check on, is the value used to be numeric. I'm assuming that this actually still works. They say that the value is the string, and that during the post process, it's going to convert, because it's wrapped in this hash field concept, it's going to convert this string value into the ID and do the proper association. So with any luck, I did see that the stuff that was loaded from these HTMX stuff does seem to have the right attributes on it, so that's good news. Like, there's no problem there. Was there? Let's see. That's XZE. Hopefully this is also XZE. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Because there's two different load sequences on this. There's the actual, like, full page refresh, which is what you saw with the first 3 tasks. So that's one view of this. And then anytime there's an AJAX call, it does something slightly different. So we've got 4 tasks, and I want to save them and make sure they actually get added to this bulk thing. Okay, good. That still works. Great. So that was that one. And then the last thing that I wanted to check on was that daily view. On the daily view, there are these checkboxes. And we can essentially, for any of these that we check, and we hit save. That one has homework, so I don't want to go to the grade page. I'm just going to check a few of these, and it'll bring me back to this page and mark them as completed. Looks like it worked. Okay. So the parsing that I was worried about, where I was previously doing casting to an int, which was kind of dumb on my part. That was actually like there was no value error stuff. That was just a problem. I wasn't catching the exception if it was wrong. That was foolish. And it's still foolish because I still have another int parse in there. But now it seems to be doing that. And let's uncheck one and check another. Make sure that there were two paths. There was a complete and incomplete. I want to make sure both sides are still working. And it completed one and undid one. All right, great. So that is good. All right. So I think that brings me to where I want to finish off for the night. We've touched a lot of files, a lot of code. We can pipe that to diffstat and see what it says. So a lot of little changes. This wasn't a hard problem necessarily, but it's one where I'm so thankful that I have this safety net of having really good test coverage, because there were a bunch of things in there that would have blown up in my face had I not had tests for them in the Python code. And so thankfully I had that code. I'm going to stop there, and then I'm probably not going to do this on the next stream. I might have to do these because I'm not done. There's a bunch left to do, but I'll do them off stream, since it's one session of this was enough to illustrate how you might do this. Hopefully you found something useful out of that. You learned something along the way. As always, this content goes up on YouTube, so if there's anything you want to refer back to, I will put it up there. If you're able to give a like or a subscribe or whatever, if you're there, that's greatly appreciated too. Yeah, with all that being said, have a great night. Take care.